Hello, everyone. It's good to be here. I do want to apologize for the cancellation before, for when I think it was supposed to happen back in October, maybe even the end of September. But yeah, had to cancel very last minute. But I'm glad I kind of got rescheduled here pretty quickly. Yeah, so thanks, Samantha, and thanks for the Nevada Institute for Cultural Preservation and the site stewardship program for having me. And yeah, so we're just gonna kind of do a general overview of a site called Mesa House, or the Mesa House. It sits on Bureau of Reclamation land out near Overton, Nevada. There we go.
We don't actually see it. Oh, there it is. Perfect.
Oh, okay. And I have it up on a big widescreen. If you see me keep looking this way, that's because I have things over to my right as well. And so and it's a bit. Hopefully the picture comes through good because it's not a normal screen. But yeah, so I just kind of wanted to preface this by saying that this isn't like my own original research or anything. I just happen to be the federal archaeologist who is in charge with some of the management of the site, and I'm just basically giving you a rundown of what Mesa House is. Not a lot of people have heard of it or know about it, and we kind of like it that way, as a lot of you may know, and one of the ethical principles of stewardship program and all archaeologists really is to kind of keep sites protected by way of trying to keep their locations disclosed, because people will go out and they're susceptible to vandalism and everything. And so most of the notes that I'll be reading from come from the National Register nomination form, which was written by Monica Merle of Statistical Research Incorporated out of Albuquerque. And she was commissioned by the Bureau of Reclamation. And so I just want to give that big citation and shout out to her for the beginning of this. This photo is from the 1929 excavations at Mesa House. And it's housed at the Autry Museum in LA with the vast majority of the rest of the collection of artifacts and historical photos. And so just to go over some terms that I'll be throwing around a lot in this presentation that some non-archaeologists might need a further definition of, or we'll be using the word Pueblo a lot, which is essentially just an architectural dwelling, basically a house cluster or a room cluster, or you might hear room block. And so that would just be the dwellings in which people would live. And a pit house is another kind of architecture that is semi-subterranean. It's and would have had a more of like a mix of either mud or earth and kind of cover to it. And if you're ever at a Lost City Museum, they have a mock-up of a pit house there that's pretty good. Virgin Anasazi. Now, this is an archaeological term. We'll be referring to that. I just want to make the distinction that it's an archaeological interpretation, and it's not a native term that they would use. And this is important because it's just how, whenever you're looking back at a bunch of remaining artifacts as an archaeologist, how we kind of lump and cluster these things together. We end up calling them cultures, but we very well could be wrong, and we're probably missing a lot, and it doesn't always align with native views. And so I just kind of wanted to define that at first here, and then, even though I just put this presentation on, we're gonna get out of it here. I thought, instead of just having a map up, we would actually kind of take a little Google Earth tour. You can see the Google Earth, correct? And not me?
Yes.
Okay. And so there's Las Vegas right there, and this is kind of the general Virgin Anasazi area that we're going to be discussing. And so I'm not going to show the exact location. I don't even have it on here, and it takes a while to actually find. But here's the Virgin River right there, and then the Muddy River that goes up through Moapa Valley and Glendale and Moapa, and actually has its headwaters up here. And so coming down around Valley of Fire and the Logandale Trails area, there's a lot of interesting archaeological areas out here. You've probably seen the beautiful rock art or rock writings that in the Valley of Fire. As a lot of their trails will have that. And then I don't know, the maybe a little lesser known or lesser well traveled is the Logandale Trails, which is BLM land, and there's more rock art in there and other kinds of sites. And so throughout here, we see a lot of archaeology from this time period and from the Virgin Anasazi and other tribes as well throughout time. And so wanted to kind of show you the proximity to the river. That's going to be important. It rests on a small mesa that's connected to a larger system of tablelands extending from Overton Ridge, the western margin of the valley, and Moapa Valley extends about 30 miles along the Muddy River to its confluence with the Virgin River, which we just saw. But it's now inundated by Lake Mead, and this river is a perennial drainage fed by the Muddy Spring that forms an oasis amid a barren desert landscape. And the overwhelming majority of Virgin Anasazi habitation sites are concentrated along the margins of the Muddy and Virgin Rivers, a pattern which other archaeologists directly attributed to the dependability of the water source. And whenever that's kind of coupled with the high water table and the suitability of the open floodplain for agricultural pursuits, that makes for kind of a perfect storm for any kind of farming kind of lifestyle. Notably, stream flow reconstructions for the Virgin River actually peaked during the 1200s to 1400s, a period more currently accepted as correlating to the Mesa House occupation, and evidence for peak Virgin River stream flow reconstructions extending from the 1200s to the 1400s, coupled with more consistent spring-fed Muddy River waters along which Mesa House is situated, is presumed to play a major role in determining the settlement location among the Virgin Anasazi populations at the time. So get this. So the mesa that it sits on rises about 120 feet above the valley floor, and it's an erosional remnant of the Muddy River terrace system. And like we just said, the access to reliable water source was necessary to accommodate floodplain agriculture. And that's been the primary reason to suggest that's the primary reason behind the placement of Mesa House directly overlooking the Muddy River Valley. Indigenous populations used the naturally occurring limestone and quartzite cobbles that currently litter the surface of the mesa top as readily available construction material for the Pueblo. Presently, vegetation on the mesa is extremely sparse, consisting of just shrubs and plant remains that are still found in the archaeological context of this site and other nearby sites that prove that this was still the same vegetation as back then. Because timber was scarce, prehistoric pueblos in this area were commonly built of adobe and rock with creosote bush and other shrub species typically constituting the wooden elements in these constructions. So Virgin Anasazi is defined as the westernmost extent of Pueblo culture and is named after the concentration of the Puebloan settlements located near the confluence of the Virgin Muddy Rivers. And you can kind of see that's kind of to the map to the right is where I just had it zoomed in on Google Earth. The chronology and the archaeological phases are listed to the left, starting with the Moapa phase. That's the 300 to 500, 300 BC to 500 AD. And that was just, that corresponds with the larger Southwest group or archaeological time frame called basket maker. And it lacked pottery, and guess what? They made baskets. And they were living in and using pit house architecture at that time. And then a little bit later, what came the Muddy River phase, or basket maker 3, still in pit houses. That's whenever the bow and arrow got introduced to the area, and also ceramics started being used. The Lost City phase, you may have heard of the Lost City site, which and now the Lost City Museum. That was typical of this time frame from 700 to 1150 AD. And that's whenever these above ground dwellings, the pueblos, started being constructed and used. And there was a full reliance on agriculture at that time. Mesa House phase, finally. Mesa House is the type site for the Mesa House phase. Did I define type site? Maybe I missed that one in the beginning. Type site would be the site that first defines something about, I guess, an archaeological time frame, or maybe an artifact type or something like that. And so a lot of times it'll just take the name of that site. And you've heard of Clovis before. That was named at the type site was in Clovis, New Mexico. And so the Mesa House type site, that broadly correlates to the late Pueblo II, early Pueblo III period. This phase corresponds to the latest known period of occupation represented in the Virgin Anasazi sequence.
Justin, you have a question.
All right.
Early on, you mentioned the BLM trail near Valley of Fire with rock images. Is it publicly accessible? If so, what is its name and how can we learn about it?
Yeah, so Logandale Trails, you can look that up. That is publicly accessible. It's a really gorgeous area. I mean, when you look at it all on a map, it looks like it's kind of a part of Valley of Fire, but Valley of Fire is a state park, and Logandale Trails is the BLM portion of that. And yeah, that's open to the public. And I would highly suggest four-wheel drive if you're gonna go out there. It is basically pure sand. And I think they rent some ATVs and things out there too. So it is a fun area and has some definitely some cool rock art in there. So I hope that answered it well. We're gonna jump onto the excavations that happened at Mesa House. And you may have heard of Mark Harrington, maybe not, who was famous early archaeologist that excavated plenty of sites around southern Nevada and Arizona. And his early work in the lower Moapa Valley directly led to the recognition of this westernmost extent of the Pueblo settlement, or the Virgin Anasazi culture area. Prior to his excavations, the consensus among southwestern researchers were that the Colorado River marked the westernmost boundary of Pueblo settlement, although neighboring areas of the northern Southwest, such as northeastern Arizona, received considerable attention from archaeological researchers and scholars. They largely overlooked developments in southern Nevada. And so that what happened was that they just thought whenever you hit the Colorado River, there was no more you didn't see ancient pueblos anymore. But Harrington said, no, it looks like there's more in southern Nevada that we have to try to understand. And he was the first researcher to identify subtle changes that eventually it grew to define what Virgin Anasazi meant, and why that's different than just regular Anasazi. And it was really subtle changes in the pottery assemblage and the architectural layout and the construction of storage facilities that he regarded as being the representative of the link between Pueblo II and Pueblo III periods. And the Mesa House phase was defined solely on the basis of trends observed in the Mesa House dataset, including an increase in the proportions of corrugated over decorated planeware. That those are different kinds of pottery types that were found there, and a few more notable pottery changes that he said, this looks different and enough to constitute renaming it a whole nother phase. And in comparison to the earlier occupation at Lost City, so Lost City is just slightly earlier, only a couple hundred years maybe, than the Mesa House, and the architecture represented a more solidly built structure that incorporated larger quantities of stone and displayed a planned, often circular or C-shaped layout of rooms that surrounded a courtyard. The Mesa House phase was also considered to mark the end of the Pueblo occupation in southern Nevada. The layout of the site exemplifies lowland Virgin Anasazi architecture of this period, which is characterized generally by a circular arrangement of connected dwellings and storerooms enclosing a central plaza. That would be right here. That would have been shared by a co-residential group called a courtyard group. The enclosed courtyard arrangement of this settlement is one of the key elements that defines Mesa House as the type site for the late Pueblo II, Pueblo III occupations. The main architectural component of Mesa House is the semicircular or C-shaped arrangement of 33 surface rooms surrounding an almost entirely, completely enclosed courtyard space. And an additional row of rooms is appended to the southwestern edge of the main courtyard group. And there's other detached rooms and pit houses that are scattered. And there's 84 rooms in all, most of them interpreted as small storage rooms. The original excavator of the site was actually not Harrington, so he went out and hired Irwin Hayden, and Hayden actually, he was the one that suggested that only 3 of the rooms within the courtyard group represent dwellings. So out of all those rooms, there's just 3 that were actually dwellings. These included fire pits and were large enough for people to inhabit. Each of those 3 possible residences was connected to a chain of attached storerooms. And this led Hayden to conclude that the Pueblo was divided into 3 sections, each of which may have represented a distinct family group. So that would have been their courtyard group. Nearly a dozen of the detached rooms scattered around the courtyard group also included fire pits and were interpreted to represent additional residences later on. Margaret Linus, an anthropology professor at UNLV, conducted a reassessment of the exterior rooms and suggested that only 3 included both walls and fireplaces, and thus they undoubtedly represented the residential structures. And in total, there was 36 fire pits located outside of the structures that were reported as surrounding the ruin. Next here. So I mentioned Irwin Hayden before, but Louis Shellbach was actually the very first person to actually excavate there, and that was in 1926. And that included several test trenches and a burial. and that was in the spring of 1926. A scouting party actually led Shellbach to encounter Mesa House during a search for pottery specimens known pretty well in the area. Willis Evans and Leslie Sanchi of the Zuni Pueblo accompanied Shellbach on the reconnaissance, and Shellbach described the discovery of Mesa House as accidental, occurring during a brief stop on the way to the Burial Hill site north of Overton during the final days of their expedition.
Here's a question. Was the previous photo Willis Evans?
Previous photo.
So the previous photo, was that Willis Evans? The one before this? There was
So
a guy.
that one's Louis Shellbach. I don't. Oh, maybe that. No, these are both Harrington. He looks a little ghost-like in that photo, actually. But you know, these old photos sometimes. I think those are the only photos of people that I had. Yeah, so I do know that just, yeah, this one's Shellbach. And it was only after his 1926 visit that he determined that this particular site had been originally identified by Harrington during a 24 reconnaissance. So Harrington identified it, Shellbach came and actually excavated it, and then Harrington hired another guy, Irwin Hayden, to go back and excavate it later on. It was actually through a permit that Harrington issued Hayden through the Southwest Museum of the North American Indian in Los Angeles. That will be important later. And detailed information regarding the specific methods used by Hayden and Shellbach to excavate Mesa House, the Mesa House, is for the most part lacking, as was typical of a lot of archaeological excavations conducted in the early 1900s. Emphasis was placed on the recovery of whole specimens for museum display, as well as uncovering structures and burials. The more mundane vestiges of domestic activity like flagstone and debitage and pottery, they were usually overlooked, and they didn't think that they could provide relevant or detailed information relevant to aspects of, say, technological organization, regional exchange, potential nuances in the occupation sequence, and all those things that we know now. Only a small tally of these items excavated per feature is provided in the site report, which lacks even basic information regarding them, such as raw materials and the ceramic types that were excavated. Going back, these are some of the older photos that were from the excavation there, and sorry, I could not get better quality ones than what you're seeing. They're a bit blurry, and those are blown up. So that might be why they're more blurry, but they would have been way too small otherwise. So whenever Harrington permitted the Irwin Hayden to go as a part of the Southwest Museum expedition and excavation, that was in 1929. Detailed, like I said before, I guess the information that they were coming up with, it's not really, they didn't take good notes, so let's just say that. And it was pretty typical of archaeological excavations back then. I'm kind of losing spot here. So what we have remaining from them, we don't have like the detailed site reports and artifact tallies that we might have from excavations today, where you have to keep all of your field notes and they get gathered on a daily basis, and they get kept along with all of the artifacts whenever they get curated in the end. So here's what it looks like today. Sorry it took so long to actually get to a photo of it. I was going through my presentation, thinking, you know, they probably want to see what this looks like now. And so there it is. This is me stitching together a couple different photos to give you kind of the wide frame view right there. It doesn't look like much. That's it's hard to really give an in-depth presentation with pictures and everything whenever there's not a lot that is currently on the surface. And the ruins basically remain unchanged almost a century after those excavations we were just talking about. Environmental factors impacting the site are basically alluvial sheet wash, so just runoff from the mesa top, and erosion that there's a down cutting gully less than a meter in depth that's actively dissecting the mesa top along the southwestern site periphery. These disturbances haven't presently impacted the nature of any of the archaeological features of the site, with the exception of this sediment refilling in the structures. This mesa top remains relatively undisturbed by cultural impacts, although the lowland areas immediately to the north, south, and east have been subject to modern development. There is evidence of ATV traffic near the western site boundary, but the tracks didn't appear to have gone onto the site, and they haven't really changed much. And that was reported back in 2015, and they're still kind of out there today, but there haven't been any more since then. Although much of the archaeological data contained within the extent of the known architectural features was removed through the original excavation, most of the courtyard and areas covered in the back dirt piles remain undisturbed. This is partially why we like to keep the location confidential whenever you have undisturbed deposits that people might want to go in and do their own treasure hunting and whatnot. And so these areas, they might actually contain intact trash deposits that we, with modern methods, we can get a whole abundance of information relevant to the day-to-day domestic activities of the site occupants, as well as materials suitable for chronometric dating and other types of dating. Visible artifacts on the surface, there's really not that many there. I've walked over this site probably a dozen times now, and you don't really see a whole lot. You might get some flakes. I don't know if I've seen pottery out there. Flakes being stone tool shatter, basically, that comes off during flint knapping process or whenever you're making the stone tools. And so, but these kind of artifacts that have been seen out there, along with like charred plant remains and animal bones, they remain in clear association with the structural remains and back dirt piles, further indicating that the site does retain information potential. It's these more mundane kinds of artifacts that was overlooked in the 1929 excavations and can provide information necessary to address critical data gaps that exist in the lowland Virgin Anasazi archaeological record, especially with regard to refining existing cultural chronologies and understanding aspects of, say, regional abandonment. Is there more questions? No.
There actually is. One of the neighbors to the site was asking, what is the plan specifically to protect the site from damage from motorcycles and ATVs, and has there been any discussion about this, and who is the responsible person? And honestly, I also was like, how much vegetation does it get?
Greg, I see it now, Greg Cleveland. I think we've spoke before on the phone. That was when I first started reclamation. I'm glad you're here because I did lose your contact information, and we might want to get in touch about the questions that you asked, but about some other things that we might want to be doing out there. If you could, maybe we could like share email addresses or something through this. But I am going to get to kind of what the future holds for Mesa House. But yeah, I'm glad that you commented, and hopefully we can get back in touch. Some researchers have interpreted the placement of Mesa House, the latest known occupation site on the steep Mesa summit, and it in a maybe defensible position. The enclosed courtyard layout might reflect a final stronghold against raiding nomadic groups entering the lowland Virgin Anasazi region, but that's kind of now been overshadowed by later research, and I think the thought now is that it really was just the proximity to the river and to good farmable land. Yeah, others have argued that the position of the settlement is more related to the adjacent arable lands of the spring-fed Muddy River, and that they cite the location of Mesa House as evidence in support of agricultural intensification among Virgin Anasazi populations. More recent investigations into the settlement patterns show a very similar trend that signifies important changes in late Pueblo II, Pueblo III period settlement location and organization. The population density of the Virgin Anasazi in the Moapa Valley peaked during the late Pueblo II period, at a time when settlement patterns exhibited a corresponding shift from kind of dispersed single habitations to aggregated village settings, specifically concentrated along the banks of these rivers. And yeah, so they are concentrated along these rivers and larger groups, and kind of moved from more dispersed habitations into what we're seeing here.
Justin, did you ever notice Indian tobacco out there?
I don't know. I'm not a huge plant IDer. I probably wouldn't even know if I saw it. So no, not saying there isn't. You know.
Does some distance from the river reveal anything about the river flow or flooding at the time? Does it seem like the river 800 years ago had the same flow as today?
No, I think I was reading something in the beginning that there was some a correlation. Hold on, I gotta flip back. I think my notes are attached to these slides, even though you can't see them there. But I know. Yeah, notably, stream flow reconstructions for the Virgin River, a non-spring-fed watercourse, actually peaked during the 1200s, 1400s, period more currently accepted as correlating to the Mesa House occupation. So, Virgin River, at least, that did, and the Muddy, I think that was more consistent because that's spring fed, and so yeah, it looks like the Muddy would have been the same, and then the Virgin would have peaked a little bit more. So maybe not directly tied to Mesa House, but maybe some of the other Virgin Anasazi occupations out there. Okay, material remains recovered during the Mesa House excavations include various stone tools, pottery, textiles, basketry, yucca fiber cordage, a wooden awl, antler clubs, bone awls, and gaming pieces, ornaments, figurines. The stone tools include more than 49 arrow points, a drill, Small number of blades made of chert, quartzite, obsidian. There were stone discs, polishing stones for making pottery, and a number of grinding stones like monos and metates. This is what they would have ground their corn with, and some people still use them to this day. And they would have used, they would process corn and wild seed, things like that. Jewelry and figurines include a few pendants and a figurine made of turquoise, a stone pendant, a worked horn figurine, and an abalone shell pendant. Pottery vessels consisted of 3 mostly intact jars, 2 of them excavated from burials, a bowl, a clay pipe, and a large sherd from a bowl or jar that was reworked into a plate. A variety of pottery types and wares that were represented at Mesa House include ones from all over the Southwest, like Kayenta wares, San Juan, Shibwitz plain, Moapa grayware. Whenever you really get into the archaeology nitty gritty of it, a lot of those come from are from local and trade in. Among these are sherds from a small variety of decorated white and red wares, but undecorated grayware and corrugated sherds represent the majority of the pottery associated with Mesa House. Some of the remains of corrugated grayware vessels had painted interiors, characteristic of the San Juan pottery tradition, associated with the area east of the Arizona Strip and the Colorado River. Evidence of food remains found during the original excavations included both domesticates and wild plant resources, so things that they were farming and things that they were collecting. Among those identified were maize, corn cobs and kernels, sunflower seeds, pine nuts, screw bean pods, squash seeds and rinds, and the animal remains noted during the excavation include desert tortoise, and a small quantity of bird bones, and a few from large mammals such as deer or bighorn sheep. So where are those artifacts found? And I'm kind of giving it away right here. Before we were talking about whenever Harrington permitted Hayden to go out and do some of the larger excavations. And that was permitted through what was then known as the Southwest Museum. And that's in Los Angeles. But then now it gets a name change, and it's currently the Autry Museum, still in LA. I've yet to go there. So people might ask, why aren't they in Southern Nevada? And that was because they got the original excavations were essentially museums going out and collecting things for those museums, and then they never left. And so they're currently in the Autry. However, the Bureau of Reclamation does own those. These were excavated from Bureau of Reclamation lands and federal lands at the time of the excavation, and so we do have ownership of those. But in archaeology, curation is kind of a big deal. It costs a lot to curate materials. It requires space. It requires the right kind of conditions and housing for the artifacts. And if somebody else wants to curate your artifacts for you, then they're going to let them do that. So it's not really any kind of competition or anything. We work with the Autry a lot, specifically on these collections, and so they're currently housed in LA. But I wanted to show you something. Was there more questions you need?
Nothing else that's sitting out here.
Okay. I want to show you what we get as something like a little behind the scenes look at, whenever I say that they're another museum curating our things, okay, how do we know what's there, and what does that look like on our end? Are you seeing the file sheets? Are you just seeing me?
I just see your file system, yes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
And then there are some questions if you want.
1 second here. This is just, I just wanted to open this and kind of show you. This is what a digital inventory looks like of all the Mesa House artifacts. And so this would have been cataloged by the Autry Museum. We actually paid them to do this, as we should. We shouldn't be doing things for free, but yeah, we want to know what was there, and this is essentially what you get. It can be a lot to sort through, and so I'm not particularly a museum specialist, but I'm glad that we have one on board who can kind of go through these things whenever they need to and decipher this. And they also gave us this. These are some of the images of artifacts and the historic photos that I've been using for this presentation. But again, it's kind of being slow. It's a lot to sort through. But they took photos of all these little pottery pieces, and then let's see if I can get to it. And they're not particularly high quality. I think these are just like thumbnails that if we wanted the better photos, we would go back to them and say, hey, can we get some of the high def pictures? I can't find them. So yeah, there was some of the old photos right there. Historic photos. So
one of the guys asked if you could share the photo number you refer to. I don't was there a specific photo that you wanted to share?
I wanted to share.
I'm just reading what he like. Harold, do you have anything in specific that you are talking about?
I was just talking about I guess where these artifacts kind of currently exist, and then and I wanted to show you, whenever we don't have the actual collections, what we have at our office basically, and in our files, so that we know what the Autry has. And that's kind of where I left it off there.
Cool. Can you answer what plants were grown? Do you have information on that?
Plants were grown. I think I had some plant info in this slide. So there's definitely maize, corn cobs would have been a little bit smaller. I don't know if you were seeing the corn that they were eating at that time, but these cobs were not like the ones that you would see today. That's what they would have been farming near the river. And that, whenever we say that's a domesticated plant, then it would mainly talking about corn. But it also says that there was sunflower seeds and that were found. And so I don't know if that's they were growing those on purpose or not. And pine nuts, those could have been gathered from nearby, say Mount Charleston or anywhere up there, or maybe in the sheep range. Screw bean pods and squash seeds and rinds. I'm not totally sure what screw bean is. But yeah, I hope that gives you a little more info on the kind of plants that were found there. So what what now? So with these collections that we have in the Autry, there are some human remains and funerary objects. And so one of the big steps that that the Bureau of Reclamation has to do in the upcoming year will be to follow these steps and this process of the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act. You may have heard it been called NAGPRA. This was passed in 1990, and these are really the main sections of the law that describe the process of that repatriation, or basically just the return of these remains and funerary items to either lineal descendants or associated tribes to those remains and ancestors. Another task that we have, I guess, coming up is that we have a nomination form. I think I mentioned it right at the beginning that the Bureau of Reclamation has, but it's not been totally put through the system of listing it on the National Register of Historic Places. And so you hear archaeologists bring this up a lot to the National Register, and that's because a lot of our job, day-to-day work, is trying to determine if something is eligible or if it is not eligible for the National Register. And so how might you go about doing that? Well, there are 4 main criteria. There's, I think, a few other special situations of further criteria, but it's really these A, B, C, D. And so you have, is this site associated with an event that's made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history? So you have the event. Or the second one, is it associated with a significant person in our past? And so you have is it event, person? C, just to sum that up, it's basically, is this does it represent the work of a master? Is this some kind of architectural type that really, this really embodies, say, Art Deco? Then yes, this building might be eligible under C, something like that. Or maybe if it's a particular rock art style, a lot of times that might be eligible under C. And then there's D, that have yielded or made likely to yield important information to prehistory or history. So that one criteria is really the crux for a lot of archaeological research. It's, is this site special with what it's provided to what we know about the past? Or could it be? Does it still have the potential to yield that kind of information? So which of these criteria do you think Mesa House is eligible for, if any? Would be, this is the nomination form. I have it checked A and D. So it is associated with significant events. And in this case, it's not even necessarily the archaeology that made it eligible under this. It's the fact that these early excavations that we spent time talking about were some of the most significant early archaeological work done in southern Nevada, and that it really opened up the door for other research to be done and to look at this area. And so it's actually those events that are considered a significant contribution to our history. And then I think the more obvious one is D. That's that it yielded and still could likely yield more important information to prehistory or history. And it being a type site for the Mesa House phase is really important. It really defined the final era of the Virgin Anasazi period. And so we have this form, and we've got to get it reviewed by a few other parties, one being the local tribes and the other being the State Historic Preservation Office. And then whenever that process happens, if everyone thinks it's good, then it goes up to the keeper of the register. That's with the National Park Service. And if everyone agrees that it should be listed, then it gets listed. And the only thing that really happens is that it gets highlighted on their website. And a lot of buildings will have like a plaque or something that says this is listed on the National Register of Historic Places, but it doesn't actually come with any new types of protections or anything. A site just being eligible in the first place, not being listed, actually has the same amount of well, it's not really protections, but it gets elevated to a point where different kinds of development projects and whatnot have to, the government has to take into consideration effects to eligible sites. So if you have a solar field going in somewhere and there's 10 non-eligible sites, they've been determined non-eligible, then you could essentially build that solar farm without having to worry about the effects of those sites. But if you have 10 eligible sites, now there has to be some kind of mitigation involved for that project to actually take place. So that's a little bit of the background of what the National Register is. And I think a lot of times people just like to put things on the National Register that are extra special, and it can be anyone that does this. Even though, yeah, once it's deemed eligible, then that's really the important thing where projects have to take it into consideration. So, yes.
Well, I think you're about to go into it. Is there any specific plans for protecting the site and restricting access and signage?
Yeah, we're getting right there. Yeah, it's perfect. I think that's like the next couple slides here. And so there are laws that protect archaeological sites on public land, and this really, the main one is the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, or ARPA, and that came out in 1979. And just as of yesterday, there was a big, well, it was a good victory in Southern Nevada that we sentenced an ARPA violator. They got some hefty fine and some jail time actually for destroying a site out in Gold Butte. And so there are laws that protect these, but a lot of times people don't care, and so further kinds of things like fencing and barriers and the obstacles can thwart people from getting in there. But the biggest weapon we have is confidentiality, and so that's why sometimes it can be kind of difficult to get the location of sites that aren't already publicly known. I mean, we're aware that some of the larger areas of say rock art and everything that everyone already knows, and you can find them online and whatnot, but we won't give up that information unless we really have to, or if there's a really good purpose for it. And so this is what's out there currently. This was the ATV tracks that we saw, but this is on the walk to the site. It's not that far away. It's like maybe 100 yards from the site. This is really the only evidence of vandalism that we've seen out there. And maybe Greg knows of more things that have happened. But whenever I go out to the site, it looks like that everything on the actual site is actually pretty intact and not really disturbed since those original excavation piles and everything. I didn't see any new digging or anything. People could walk across the site and maybe take artifacts. Maybe that's what's happened so far. Maybe that's why I didn't really see that many out there. And so yes, it is exposed to some vandalism, and we don't currently have like plans to put any kind of like fencing or anything up there, because it doesn't really seem like that it is getting all that impacted. And some people might say, well, are you going to wait until it actually does get impacted to put that up? Yeah, you could make that case, that we should probably get ahead of it. But currently I think just the fact that it's not very well known out there, that's a big help to it. But we do have some signage. So going to the site, it's a very worn out sign, but there is something that talks about the laws that are that the blue plaque talks about the cultural resource protection laws and everything. And the top part was actually a site form that talks about what was there, and it's all faded, and I don't know the last time that was even replaced or put in, but you don't really see that very much. But education is another tool, whenever people can appreciate, like, hey, this is really a cool thing out there that can be helped, that can help people to deter them from any kind of doing harm. But yeah, so there is a little bit of signage out there, and we have definitely discussed replacing this. I don't think it would really take up that much to do. We just have to do it. So a lot of the things I just went over. The next steps for Mesa House would be the NICRA repatriation of the human remains and funerary objects in the collection, listing it on the National Register of Historic Places. And both of those things require tribal engagement and input. And because we essentially paid a group of archaeologists to write that nomination form for the National Register, what would make it way better and all-encompassing would be if we could have tribal perspectives on that as well. A lot of times they don't like the words that archaeologists use. They like to make sure that their views on certain things are being stated just as much as what an archaeologist might say, and that's totally in their right, and it makes it better, I think. And so you get kind of the whole perspective by doing that, and you definitely have to involve them whenever it comes to the NICRA repatriation. I'd also like to get a drone out there, although I don't know how the citizens of Overton would like government drones flying over there over their property. Well, it wouldn't be over their property. It would just stick right to this site. So it would really benefit from good aerial imagery, I think, because you can't really see the whole thing from above from anywhere. And so that's one project I'd like to do. We could do new research on the rest of the collections in the Autry, on the non-NICRA museum stuff. That's because right now it's just essentially sitting there. And so with students that want to come along and do any kind of new schoolwork, graduate thesis or something, those collections are there. And finally, the new signage. And so I think with that, I hope that was a a pretty good overview, and now you know a little bit more about the local history and Native American history of Overton and that area.